Very good.
All right, very good, very good. Welcome back, everybody, to episode 13 of the Roses and Rhetoric podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jimmy Hackett. With me, as always, my charming co-host.
Joseph Stanford.
So we're here for another strong episode number 13. We appreciate you guys sticking with us through last week. Holiday travel was making things a little bit more difficult, so we had kind of an interesting format last week. We kind of did things solo on our end, but we are back together, love between the two hosts, for episode number 13. And Joe, it looks like you're still in Tucson. How much longer are you going to be in that neck of the woods?
That's right. I got a flight out tomorrow, so less than 24 hours here, and then it's back to the cold and the rain and the clouds and the Antifa and all the good stuff we missed.
What more do you want? Well, so how are things in the old Pueblo? How are things been going on with the visit, and then how is the town in general?
Oh, they're great here. Things are actually open, such as gyms and restaurants and bars. So it's been able to go out a little bit, but it's always you're always pressed for time during the holidays with family and friends and everything. And then you always have the friends you never know. There's two different types: people that are all about going out and disregard the whole COVID thing, and then there's other people that take it real serious. And you don't get to see some friends because of it. But all in all, it's been a good trip. How about Houston? How's Houston?
Houston's pretty good too. Wait, before we move on to me, I want to ask you, what was your big gift this year?
Big gift this year.
Besides the highly successful Rose and Rhetoric podcast, but that's besides that one. Besides,
I think the big gift this year was just being able to escape Antifa land to come down here for a week and a half. That's all.
So this year, my big gift, my sister who lives in California sent me a sweater, but I had no idea that I was getting it, and so I got a sweater in the mail with no return address, no name, no nothing. But I knew it was from her because she always sends random gifts like that. So that was the gift that I got, and then the second big gift was one of those like from JCPenney's or from Macy's. So it was like perfume all-in-one kits, where it's like perfume, shampoo, body wash, aftershave, all of like the same scent. Because like, God forbid, one scent is a little bit different than, something else. It better just be like one monoculture of scent coming off your body. So it was funny because I got that this year. It's a good gift. I mean, but I got one last year and I never used it either. So like this year I have to actually use this scent. So hopefully, it's like, I can't imagine a time in my life where I need to cologne less than right now. But hopefully, if things are going according to plan, maybe in a few months or so, we'll be able to have a reason to wear cologne again. That's what I'm hoping for, at least.
And what scent did she get you?
So it's called Man Style. It's not right. Something like that. Man something. What should I tell you? Yeah, it's like baby blue, so perfect. It's like man style, man something. You know what? We'll put it in the link. We'll consider that this episode's unofficial sponsor. You'll see it in the link after this when we post it. This episode brought to you by some perfume I have yet to wear, and I haven't even really smelled it yet, actually. So hopefully it smells good. That'll be part of the mystery of this Christmas present. So those are the big gifts. And then I got myself a couple of books on Amazon. That was a gift to myself, the gift that keeps on giving. And so they should be here on Monday. So then maybe we'll talk about those books at some point in the future. I won't mention what they are. I don't want to spoil it for our guests, but pretty quiet Christmas for me and my wife over here in Houston. Not too much to report. Anything else wanted to talk about in the week before we head into this episode? Anything fun or exciting or anything else of interest in Tucson?
I'm sure more will come up throughout the pod. So
very good, very good. Well, so in this episode, and before we get started, I do want to mention something for our episode next week. So next week, we actually have a guest joining us, an author, a Tucson author that we are very excited for, named Phil Lacovara. Phil Lacovara has written 2 books. The book that we'll be talking about next weekend is called False Flags. You can find this book on Amazon. For sure, you can find it in paperback. That's the version that I have. And it might also be on a Kindle version as well. Phil Lacovara, besides being an author, is also a well-known name in the Tucson area, involved with startup companies and very much an entrepreneurial spirit. We're going to get him on the episode next weekend to talk about managing the life of, or maybe even just the task of writing a book while obviously having a full-time job, and just the writing process in general. What is that process like when you're putting a book out into the market, working with a publisher? This book was published by Catalina Press. So we'll be sure to mention that process as well. But we're really looking forward to that interview. I have begun reading the book, about halfway done right now. Really enjoy it. Definitely a page turner. It's a kind of a spy thriller, crime thriller type book, FBI, CIA, that kind of thing. So highly, highly enjoyable. And we'll be doing the episode next weekend. We'll be talking about quite a bit of stuff. So if you like that genre of book, or just want to know more about the publishing process as it applies to someone, in this day and age, in 2020, 2021, be sure to check out that episode. It should be a lot of fun. So on that note, Joe, I will say that I have a story that I wrote for this week as well, a little piece. We can get to that in a moment. What I did want to focus on, though, is that since we didn't have a chance to talk to each other last weekend, I wanted to cover a couple of things here with you that I wanted to get your take on. And just for the record, I did, last episode, I went ahead and just assumed that everything I said you agreed with. And so that's where the record is right now. I thought that's probably a safe assumption. And so I wanted to mention a couple of things to you and to get your take on it, just kind of get your reaction to these things. So here's the first one that I was thinking about. And let me lay it out, kind of this idea that I was thinking about. This idea came from Anti-Fragile, of course. And so it was this idea that I was toying around with last week. And basically, Nassim lays out this kind of thought experiment, or kind of this result, where imagine you have 100 random numbers that are all numbered 1 through 10. So you have 100 numbers in this collection of numbers, and they're all numbered 1 through 10. So the average of that group is going to be around 5, right? Just average of 1 between 10 would be 5. So imagine that those numbers all represent an animal, and that number represents some kind of physical characteristic of that animal. Okay. And then imagine just one more thing. Imagine that a meteor strike happens and it kills every number that is lower than 6. So you have this population, you wiped out every number that was lower than 6. Now you have this surviving population. The average of those numbers will, of course, be higher than 5 because all those numbers were wiped out. But it also will be higher than 6. It'll be higher than the barrier that the number has had to overcome, purely by virtue of the fact that there was a distribution of numbers to begin with. And so there's this interesting idea in evolution that nature tends to, kind of in hindsight, if you're looking at this, it would be like an overreaction to that extinction event, because they didn't just survive, the population wasn't just able to survive the level 6 extinction event, but they were actually they would actually be able to survive an extinction event even higher, just by virtue of the fact that the population average is higher than that bear that they had to overcome. So I thought that was an interesting idea. And I kind of just wanted to get, as you hear that idea, kind of what's your response to, what's your reaction to it, and kind of if you think it's as cool as I thought when I read that part in the book again.
Okay, so I'm picturing that if you did a distribution of the numbers between 1 to 10, it would make a bell curve, right?
Yeah. So
the highest position would be around 5.
So not even necessarily a bell curve. If it was evenly distributed, then you would basically have like every number would have the same probability of occurring. Yeah, exactly. It'd be like a flat line. And so you could do it with the distribution like you're talking about as well. But even if it was random and like you had any kind of an even distribution of numbers across, those different sectors, however you want to play, with the distribution, you could get different results. But I think the end result would end up being the same, that when you chop off the people who don't make it, on this extinction level event, a meteor strike or something, the group that you're left with, that new average is higher than the average, or than the barrier that they had to overcome. So you observe, just purely through probabilistic, means, you observe an overcorrection in the surviving population. So like, if you wanted to put like a characteristic to it, could be like holding your breath. Like everybody died who couldn't hold their breath for 5 minutes. Okay, so they all died. So then the average breath holding time of everybody who survived would be higher than that average that they had to overcome.
Okay. Or like the giraffes on the plains in Africa, and if a certain level of tree branches got destroyed,
Yes.
only the tall would survive.
Yes, very good. It'd be the exact same thing. And so there's this idea that Nassim talks about where, you know, it's an overcorrection. And I thought that was an interesting idea, this idea that, you know, we can overcorrect to things. And you'll notice that in this situation, any one individual player isn't making a choice to overreact. It's just the behavior of the group, or let me say the characteristics of the group that have that overreaction. But that was kind of a theme of some things that I was exploring last week, was this idea of overreaction and how it can be beneficial. And here is just one example of the overreaction. Again, completely, you know, it wasn't like they made a sentient choice to overreact. It was just, that's how the population would end up surviving. That the effect would be an overreaction. You know, one of the things that Nassim attacks in Anti-Fragile and in his other works as well is this idea of pursuing efficiency. That efficiency it leads to fragile results. So that if you fine tune something to some set of circumstances, you're fragile to changes in those circumstances. And I like that idea as well. I like the idea that as living things, we evolve to have some slack in the system to respond to a variety of different things. Like, you think one of the benefits of being warm-blooded is that now we have this range of temperatures we can survive in. We didn't evolve to survive at one temperature. We evolved to live in a range of temperature. So that would be just another example of this. And attacking efficiency instead of focusing on something else. You know, this in one case, an overreaction, other case, it's just general slack in the system that has benefits as well.
Right. So if you had that population where you had a variety in the amount of time people could hold their breath, then that gives you a buffer in the sense that if there was a requirement from natural selection that you had to hold your breath for 5 minutes or longer to survive, you would still have a population that would remain. But how is that considered an overreaction? It seems like it would just be the perfect amount of people that would survive.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it's only an overreaction in the sense that the people who survived, it wasn't as if the population narrowed on that barrier, that the new average of the population is actually higher than the barrier. So it's only an overreaction to the extent that the new population is better equipped to handle that same barrier than they, you know, need to be, you know, in some sense, that the average doesn't move towards the barrier, it actually moves above it. And so it's only an overreaction from that perspective. And I guess I just found that a very interesting result. And I think it's an easy enough thing to think through that I think all of us can kind of picture that in our heads. But it's this idea that we as humans now, you know, that, and I say humans, as any animal, that is the case now. I mean, as living things, we have survived any number of events. And every time that we overcame an event, the people who made it as a whole are better equipped to handle that same event. And in fact, we're over-prepared in some instances to handle that same event. And so it's just kind of this interesting idea of, you know, life as a process, evolution as a process, society as a process. You know, we are constantly, you know, even if we don't want to, again, like I said, this is purely just, you know, the distribution causes. It has nothing to do with anybody making a choice. That as we live, we are evolving whether we want to or not. As a population, whether we want to or not, we are always evolving towards something. That is always true, but it's also true that the steps we take are sometimes unexpected. And I think this is maybe one of those results where it's unexpected that we would end up being overcompensated for having overcome that barrier beforehand, that we far exceed what we would need to overcome that same barrier again in the future.
Okay. So before we're more generally able to handle disruptions in the system, but after the disruption, what comes is a more specified, more specialized group that can handle those conditions.
Yeah, better equipped, better prepared, you know, whatever it may be.
Does that take away any resilience from future issues that are of different natures?
You know, in that case,
like say, like what if? Yeah, just as an example, I guess with the breathing, I guess it doesn't really make sense. But if there was a requirement that you had to have a shorter amount of time that you could hold your breath, like your population at that point would be kind of screwed, right?
Yeah, and so, but there, even still, said that if as long as it wasn't an extinction level event where it killed everybody, the group that then survived on the lower barrier would again find their average shift to, in this case, let's say to the left of that barrier. So let's say that like after the 6, number event, whatever group was left, say that another one happened that was like at 7. Now the group that survives will be, the average will be lower than 7. So like even then, even if you pass the barrier and overcompensate on one side of that barrier, if that same barrier were to hit you again, or a slightly higher barrier were to hit you again, then you would find that the population again would overcompensate by moving to the left of that barrier, depending on who's being killed out, basically. So as long as you have a population that survives, the average of that population will be, slightly off, as long as there are some people in that group whose value is lower than that barrier. So as long as you're surviving, you're going to move to the other side of that number. So, but you make a good point. I mean, obviously, we're never done filling the void of our environment. That's like when I think of evolution, it's like we are like filling the container of this space of situations that we can encounter, and we're never done doing that. And as we are evolving to one environment, that environment is itself changing. So I mean, it's always a matter of chasing a moving target with evolution. That's why it never is done, and it never will be done. We're always responding to the past, and in that process, while that time is happening, what we are evolving to is also changing. That environment's also changing. So good point.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's always a transient process.
It's always a transient process, and I really like this idea of overreaction. One of the quotes that Nassim has, I won't get it quite right, but it's something to the effect of that excess energy to and overreaction to some set of events is what leads to innovation. That we're faced with some challenge in our life, and we respond to that challenge, and in that process of overreacting, end up with innovation or change or something like that too. So I thought that was interesting as well, and that ties into a point that I wanted to talk with you about. I think that this is a thing that you have mentioned before that I wanted to put kind of in a different context, but this idea of how manners and learned behavior limit the actions we consider as individuals in certain situations in certain moments of our life. And so I wanted to put that in the context of considering the totality of the solution space at any point in time that you're alive in, that wherever you are in your life, there's likely more options at your disposal than you're aware of. And I think that sometimes through learned behavior, we just blind ourselves to certain outcomes, or to certain behaviors. And I think this ties into, something that I consider you to be kind of an expert in, these social, realms, basically, that, and this is a process that you've described to me, but, you've spent maybe the past few years trying to understand these self-imposed limitations and the harder work of how to overcome them. And to me, what I see that putting that in the context in the context of Nassim Taleb and looking for value through optionality, that is a process of giving yourself more options in your life, whether it's in a social setting or whatever the setting may be. The whole point is to give yourself more options to pick from to have a better outcome.
Yeah, that reminds me of a movie I just watched, actually. But before I tell you about that movie, I need to adjust my lighting real quick.
Yeah, go ahead and turn down the sun. And before Joe comes back, if anybody's had a glitch on their computer, couldn't see it, again, next weekend, join us, Phil Lacavara, talking about false flags from Catalina Press. But anyways, Joe, thanks for turning down the sun a little bit. And anyways, yes, back to the movie and the idea of considering the whole of this solution space.
I really need to fire my current gaffer, for not doing his job right now. The movie I saw, it's called Captain Fantastic. Have you ever seen that movie or heard of it?
It sounds familiar. Tell me who's in it.
Oh my gosh, it was really good. The star character is Viggo Mortensen, which is another story in its own, because I started the movie and I knew that it was Aragon or Strider, but I couldn't remember his actor name. The whole time. So I kind of made it a test for myself to see if I could come up with a name by the end of the episode, by the end of the movie, which ended up just being more torture than anything. You know, it's one of the worst things. You have something on the tip of your tongue and you can't come up with the name, and it's like, oh, I know it, I can come up with it, but it's just not there. And then you just relax for like a couple hours and it comes to you. Anyways, it was like a 2-hour movie and it came to me until the end. And then in the end credits, it's like Viggo. I'm like, oh yeah, there's no way I would have got Viggo.
No. Viggo's too hard to name.
Yeah, but I had like names pop in that kind of came up with it, but I don't know. It's just, oh, he's great, dude. He had a beard like halfway through the movie and then he shaved it, and I was like, there's the moneymaker. That's what.
No, he's very handsome, man. I always, back in our you and I, what would have been in our grade school days, all the girls liked Legolas. Orlando Bloom was the heartthrob. But really, if we're being honest, the heartthrob of Lord of the Rings was Aragorn, 100%. And that's still true to this day. I mean, it is a very handsome man. But anyways, I digress. Back to the movie.
So this movie came heavily recommended to me by a couple different people, which led me to watch it last night. And what it's about is it's about Viggo Mortensen. He lives out in the forest or just a remote living with like 5 or 6 of his kids. And it's essentially documents how he like homeschools his children.
Oh, yeah.
Makes his own curriculum for them. So they read all like the great literature and he like asks the right questions. Like, no, when he asked for a review on a book, one example was he asked one of his kids about the book Lolita, right? Which is a famous book from like the 1950s, made by a Russian author that was studying at Stanford at the time. And it's a book about basically how he's a pedophile and how he becomes obsessed with this 12-year-old. And so Viggo in one of the scenes asks the daughter, like, what's the book about? And then she says like, oh, it's about, this pedophile dude that follows this girl around, takes this girl around with him as he travels. And he's like, no, like, what's the implications? And it's like, that was like a question that typically doesn't get asked or like really well thought out during school. A lot of times, like a lot of the curriculum is very plot centered. And then she went on to describe how like, yeah, it's an interesting story because it's told from the perspective of the pedophile, from the guy that has these, infatuations with these young girls. And it's like disgusting, but it's also like you feel bad for him at the same time and you really can empathize with him. So it's a weird mind trip for the brain, but through this homeschooling, he's able to teach the kids stuff like that. And like they play music and they hunt their own game and they don't eat any GMOs or any of this stuff. And one of the big scenes is like a family member dies and the whole clan has to go into the city and the civilization to like to go to this wedding or to go to this funeral. And it shows them at like a diner and the kids are like, hey daddy, what's a milkshake? What's a grilled cheese sandwich? And then they go to like some other kid's house and like they're like playing these video games and they're just like shocked and all like overstimulated and shit like that.
Right.
It's an interesting movie about going back to what you were saying about like the labels and what labels are programmed into people beforehand versus what labels are just intrinsic and natural that people have. And then it comes down to where to draw the line. Like in the beginning, I kind of started off with saying that this homeschool ideology and methodology is superior, just because of the sense that you can teach people things. Like all these kids could recite the Bill of Rights, they could recite all the presidents, like they're just very well educated. But towards the end of the movie, it's like one of the children was accepted to college, and the Viggo Mortensen was like, why do you need to go to college? You already know everything. And he's like, yeah, I know everything comes out of a book, but in terms of the world, I know nothing. And it was just kind of left it open-ended like that. Like there's pros and cons.
Yeah, I think that's something that as more and more learning, well, I think we're seeing it right now, is with online learning. I mean, that's from coronavirus, is this idea of what does it mean to learn something? What is the purpose of school? What can you get from a YouTube video? And then, but what can't you get from YouTube video? I mean, I think, one of the things that we're all having to realize is like, hey, this online learning, something's missing from that actually. And, it's, I don't know, anybody could put, a finger on it, but it turns out that even with all this technology and everything else, there's still a reason to put a kid in the classroom. Like that's what we're learning. And so, hopefully, maybe one of the silver linings, I guess, of COVID is that we maybe put more time into trying to figure out not only what is the purpose of education, but also what is it that having a good teacher in the classroom brings to that environment, and that can that become something that we look for, and obviously we already do, but can we better figure out what that thing is to try to find more of it? Because kind of this point is from this movie that you're talking about here, is that obviously education is important. I mean, that's humans kind of become adults through that process to some extent. Obviously some of it also is just through things that have nothing to do with learning, but learning is definitely a part of growing up. And to figure out how to better access the toolkit that good teachers have, I don't know. I mean, I can think back on good teachers I had, on bad teachers I had, and I even with that in mind, it would still be hard for me to try to figure out like what was that key ingredient that they had that made them better at their job. And then the same thing too with classes. Like, which classes do I find were more important for me as I've gotten older versus ones that I thought were not that valuable at all.
Yeah, it begs the question: what makes a good education? Is it understanding of history, understanding of how to do complex problems, or are there some more intangible values that education has to offer, like being in a class, like learning how to deal with the socio status of everyone in the class and teachers, and dealing with bullies, and dealing with girls or boys. There's just an infinite amount of like stimulation from different people coming from all over that, especially with coronavirus, that's like putting us in an isolation. It's keeping us at home, keeping us in our dorm rooms, keeping us wherever studying. So that has to have a big impact on what the future generations will look like, I would imagine. But just think about like some of your school experiences. Like, what do you remember a lot of, oh, that was really good learning that particular topic? Or do you think like, oh, that teacher was real good, like that teacher was really suave or
Yeah,
charismatic?
that's a good question. I think, when I think back on subjects that I really enjoyed, I was like maybe one of 5 people I know who enjoyed geometry. That was probably my favorite math in high school, was geometry. And I really enjoyed chemistry as well. I've actually have grown to like chemistry quite a bit less as I've gotten older, but I really enjoyed it for some reason in high school. Probably the subject that I enjoyed the most was a class that I took in college that was basically, so my degree is in chemical engineering, and kind of the cornerstone of all chemical engineering stems from this class called transport phenomena. And I'm not going to go into a diatribe about that, what that is. But what I will say is that what made that class interesting is, and what makes transport phenomena interesting, is that you find out that through 3 topics that apparently have nothing to do with each other, which one would be heat transfer, one would be mass transfer, the other one would be momentum transfer, that all these things that are at their heart seemingly very different are actually very similar in terms of the math that describes them, and are similar in terms of the intuition that you use for understanding them. And so that was kind of the first class where there was a lot of effort into trying to frame uh, physical phenomena into abstract terms. And I found that process to be very enjoyable. But there was also a phenomenal teacher for that class as well, who had just a mastery of the subject and made it very accessible as well. And so, when I think back to your question, what made that class so special is that it was, besides from the physical phenomena that we were covering, it was this idea of shifting a conversation from the physical world to the abstract world, then kind of back to the physical world. Like, that's how you made the connection. Like, you had this one phenomenon over here, it would abstract, and then you would have this world of abstract equations that you would then bring down to describe another thing. And that connection, and exploring that connection, to me was interesting. Kind of learning that framework from how to think was what made that class entertaining for me, and also interesting.
Yeah, I think back to my heat and mass transfer class, and there's the same thing, like just taking some physical properties from the world, running it through some some equations or some system of equations and then popping out an answer that relates back to the physical world. And just seeing that repeated course over course over course was definitely influential in shaping my view of the world and how the world works. I think there were other classes too that had some philosophical value to me, like coding, for example.
Yeah.
Like MATLAB coding, like just it's really just a lesson in logic that's hidden behind equations.
Yeah.
And I thought that was super useful. But
I agree.
Looking back at college and school, like I think more of the experiences I had outside of the classroom than inside the classroom, I would have to say, are the ones that are more memorable to me.
I think so too. Before we move on to computer or from computer programming, let me just say one thing about computer programming. I agree with you 100% about the logic part. And I think, I was thinking about this last week actually, but so in Scott Adams' book, Lose Or Think, he has these chapters, thinking like a historian, thinking like a scientist, thinking like an engineer, thinking like a psychologist, maybe a few more, an artist maybe as well. The one that I thought he was missing from there would have been thinking like a computer scientist. And the reason I say that is because the way that a computer solves problems is this idea of taking something complex, putting it into something simple, and repeating that simple task over and over again. And I think there's a lot of value in thinking about problems that way, about learning how to take a complex problem, breaking it apart into something that is simple and understandable, and then building up from that again. I think that is an immensely powerful lesson to learn in life, and one that is at the heart of computer science. Is computers can do like three things basically, or like some number, a small number of things, but this world that we have around us is from smart people who figured out, how do I build those simple building blocks into these programs, these collections of small repeatable tasks to achieve some result that is mind-boggling. Like right now we're on Zoom, right? Like what is Zoom? Like at its heart, it's going to be a bunch of if and statements, like, or something along those lines, right? Like it's going to be a bunch of simple code that someone's is repeating over and over again. And so I think that process is extremely important for all of us to put our mindsets into. And I think that was, if I could ask Scott, maybe if like, the second version or, the second edition of Lose Or Think, maybe include a chapter on how to think like a computer scientist, that would be kind of a cool one, I think. And one that he would be able to, because he has some background in computer science, obviously, with WhatsApp and those kind of things.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
And that begs a question, because there are two different types of problems in the world, it seems. There's problems that are just, problems are limited by how many beans you can count at once. And I would say that's kind of like the Zoom problem that you posed earlier. It's just, how do you count these bits and pieces from one area and then package them on the internet and then reassemble them on the other side? And there are some efficiencies that you can develop along the way, but largely it's just, how do I count this big pile of beans and then reassemble it over here? And it's more of a computational type of problem.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also creative problems out there in the world. Like, what's the best form of leadership? Like, that's something that can't just be resolved with a bunch of ones and zeros and if and statements necessarily.
I totally agree, 100%.
So I guess maybe that would be a problem not best suited for the computer scientist to solve, but
no, right.
I don't know.
Maybe for the psychologist or for the historian or someone along those lines. And that's what I like about his book, is that he kind of shows like how each mindset's important, and that you want to have the right tool for the job. So like, you don't want the artist to solve the psychology problem. You don't want the psychology problem to be solved by the engineer. You don't want, like everybody, whether as an individual or even as a specialist, recognizing your own limitations and not because I know he does a lot about getting out of your lane, which is important too, but bringing the right tool for the job, and bringing the right mindset to the table will determine the success you have of solving whatever problem you're dealing with. So I totally agree with you. I wouldn't want the computer scientist to solve the problem of democracy per se, but at the same time, I wouldn't want the artist designing the next website either. I wouldn't want everybody to develop what he was calling a talent stack or something along those lines for solving these different problems. That was one kind of mindset that I wish he would have explored a little bit in his book, and maybe in the next edition we'll be lucky enough and he will. We'll see. Maybe if he's a fan of the podcast, maybe he'll take an taken into account.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, I didn't want to. I have a few more things, but I wanted, if you had anything you wanted to share from last week, I would turn over to you if you want.
Yes. Talking about psychology, it reminded me that listening to one of Scott Adams' Periscopes, one of his latest claims is that he has a long history of being able to debunk different areas or different specialties or different things that he really doesn't have any experience with. Like, for example, what is it called? The financial advisory industry, which is,
let me put up the number again from Alex Berenson talking about that 2 weeks ago. Yes.
Him or Nassim,
yep.
But there's stats that 94% of professional investors don't beat the S&P index. So there's this whole system of financial advisors that, just for the sheer fact that people don't understand money and they don't understand the market, that they take these people's monies and then they invest them across like a wide range and hundreds of thousands of different single stocks or ETFs or mutual funds. And they do it just to make it super complicated so people don't understand where their money is and that they find value in their advisor that's handling the money. And it's a scam industry, because if someone were just to diversify in an S&P index fund or something like that, they would actually receive superior results, more simplicity, and they would have more visibility into where their money is. But it's like this financial industry designed around complicating things so that they can hook people in and keep them there. And then you get generational wealth that gets passed on, and they keep growing it, even though they get subpar returns. So that's one example of an industry he debunked. He claims that he debunked another industry, which was the business how-to industry. So things have changed a little bit. Like, How to Fail at Anything and Still Win Big is a more modern type of self-help book or business type book. And there's other books like that. But before that, and before Dilbert came alive, there were a lot of just like BS, like scamsters out there writing like business books, like just real like cliche titles and just really not saying anything. Kind of like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which I think is kind of borderline transition between those two times.
Yeah.
But he claims.
Okay, let me cut you in. Because I think I know some examples. I want to hear from you. Give some examples of like just like stupid business advice that you would have heard. Like, I can think of some examples myself, and this is actually something that Nassim talks about as well. But just so if anyone's listening who's not familiar, because you and I think have read our fair share of self-help books, mostly from like Scott Adams types, but give our audience an idea of like some of these books that would have just been complete waste of time for someone to read.
Right, like some topics would be like, oh, follow your passions. Just go follow your passions, and then success will just come to you. Or just define big goals, like set big goals, and you'll be unstoppable. And just like weird, like metaphysical, like unprovable claims like that just really don't make any sense. And that was like the major industry. That was like a big freaking industry back in the day. But since then, that's gone away. What would Nassim say are some of those?
Yeah, so like one of the ones is like, and he actually talks about this. I think this might be in his book Fooled by Randomness, but it's like this idea of, this person followed a bunch of millionaires and said, all of these millionaires have all these habits. And Nassim's point's like, okay, don't you think that a lot of people have those habits, and that it also is the case that these millionaires also have these habits? It's basically the problem of like the silent graveyard. It's like, to be a millionaire, you need to get up by 5 o'clock every day. It's like, let me tell you something right now. Even if that were true, a whole bunch of people get up at 5 o'clock every day that are not millionaires. Like, it's just, you're not taking into account the whole sample space with some of these books. And you end up coming around to advice that's like essentially worthless, because it's not giving you what actually led to the millionaires being successful. It's, here's this trait that a bunch of people have. Also, some millionaires have it too. It's like, what's the point of that? Nothing. Yeah. But it sells a book, so it's fine.
Yeah, just because Warren Buffett drinks 3 Coca-Colas a day doesn't mean that drinking Coca-Cola every day will give you any type of success.
Exactly right. And even if every millionaire drank Coca-Cola every day, it wouldn't matter, because guess what? The majority of people who drink Coca-Cola are not millionaires. So, I mean, it just doesn't tell you anything. It's not seeing the signal through the noise, or it's just not, you're not seeing the whole
sample space to know how predictive this trait is of success. And I mean, I can think of other examples, like let's say for the moment that to be good looking or to be a movie star, you have to be good looking. That may be true. It is not true that if you're good looking, you will become a movie star, right? Like one is a necessity, but it isn't enough. And so it's easy on the tail end to look at all of these things that people had that are successful, all the things that they had, but it's a mistake to think that people who are unsuccessful lack those traits. There are plenty of people who are good looking that will not make it as actors, just unfortunately, because there's just so few actors in the world. So it's really easy to find those traits and then sell them to people. But when you tell them this is what you need, it's a lie, because they need a lot more than that. Like one thing is luck, and you're not going to find that anywhere. So
Arguably the biggest item
for especially for like acting, right? Yeah.
Chris
100%.
Pratt or Channing Tatum, like I think they just got picked up off the side of the road essentially, or just sitting in a restaurant or bartending or something, and then
Right.
Hollywood pastor came in and just found them. Like Matthew McConaughey, same thing, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It's just massive amounts of luck compounded with good looks and skill.
yeah. And I would say even like some of the classics that I've read. So like I've read the Dale Carnegie, and I like Dale Carnegie. I'm not going to hate on Dale Carnegie, but like if you read that book, a lot of it's kind of like, okay, like sure, like I guess, like I mean, it's not. It's a very long book, and I recommend it. It's fine, but like I wouldn't say that that book was life changing for me, and I would say that a lot of the advice in it was like, all right.
I think that book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, can
Yeah.
be something. That's interesting. It kind of has the same ring as How to Fail at Everything and Still Win Big, right? The titles are similar in that way. But
Yeah.
if I could sum it in one sentence, it would be, make people like you by listening to them talk.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
By being a listener to their words.
Make other people like you by you liking them. Like to put it in terms of Twitter, get followers by following other people. Like that's what it would be. Like that would be the whole book.
Yeah, which is good advice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But going back, so just knowing that notion that there are like well-established industries out there, like financial investment or business, or just they're probably all over. But
well, just confusopoly, right? I mean, that would be the Skyham's term for a lot of this stuff. Would be the confusopoly, where
the financial investments for sure.
Yeah, or like cell phones, or there's a bunch of industries like that where, by your inability as a layman to compare two things because of how complex it is, you essentially just end up picking one. Like that's the business, right? Like that's what it is.
Yeah. And the latest industry that he's taken on is the psychology industry. So he made a bold claim that the psychology industry is completely bullshit, which.
So him and Tom Cruise will be. Well, I'm sorry, Tom Cruise attacks psychiatry. So let me take that back. I apologize for that. Let me take that back.
To some extent too, but when he said it, it made sense to me because I thought back to a lot of the psychology majors that I know, and I'm like, really? Like it just didn't add up that the people that I knew were psychologists were supposedly correcting all of these complicated mental issues that people have. Specifically with like anxiety and depression. Like I don't know very many people that have been able to cure their anxiety and depression. Let alone even improve it to some degree without just some drug that has more of a shotgun approach to fixing the problem. Let me back up a little bit. He describes like the entire mental situation of people. Like there's many different symptoms of problems that you can have. Like maybe you have a fear of big spaces, or maybe you have anxiety, or maybe you have stress, or maybe you have attention deficit. But these are kind of just very general blurbs of bubbles and of ideas and problems that are happening. And then the drugs to combat these issues are more or less just, like I said, a shotgun approach to fixing them. Like there's no exact science to any of this. Like it's just kind of, I'm trying to think of a crude example where you're just mixing big chemistries and problems and sometimes coming up with solutions. And
no pun intended.
Yeah, and especially like to say like, and one of the examples he used was narcissism and how the psychology is designed narcissism as a problem. But if you look at narcissism specifically, it's just a self-centered point of view, which is really all that any human can do. Like it's impossible to live your life from someone else's perspective in any real meaningful way. And you're largely just concerned about your own problems. And the notion that people call narcissists and consider it a problem is something that he was challenging, because if you look at narcissists, like a lot of them are largely successful and largely happy. So the people that get upset by the narcissist are more or less people that are just jealous of the narcissist to begin with. Does that make sense?
I can understand what he's saying. Absolutely.
So I think that's, ever since he said that, whenever I hear people talk about narcissists or call someone a narcissist, it's more like, oh, jealousy. This person is just jealous of that person.
It reminds me of back to our conversation last weekend or the weekend before about intent versus outcome. Like, say that somebody builds a building, and as a result, this community has a whole bunch of jobs and people can go on vacation there. And it's like, if the person came out tomorrow and said, I only did that so I can make money, like, who gives a shit? Like, I don't care. Like, why do I care? Like, I like to have the hotel here. Like,
exactly. Why do you work every day?
Yeah, it's like why do I care? Like, in my view, narcissism and fixating on it, it's, obviously, if you are so self-centered that you are ruining relationships in your life, that would be different. Like, that would be something to address. But if you're not hurting yourself, if you're not, losing something, I guess, I would almost define it as, if there's no consequence, then why do you care? It kind of reminds me of like how Dr. Drew defines addiction is continued use in the face of consequence. Like, that makes sense to me. Like if you drink every day and as a result you're late to work and you miss your kid's soccer game, it's like, that's a problem. Like, you're having a consequence like that. To me, that's easy to see. And I think the same thing would be true with anybody who's like narcissistic. Like, if you're to the point where you're so self-centered, you don't have any friends, that would be a problem, I think. Like, I think you would want to fix that. But if somebody calls you that because, you put your name on a building or something, why would I care? I wouldn't find that they'd be a problem to be concerned with.
Yeah, it's like if the narcissist is the subject of the problems, then it's in the narcissist court to fix it or to get rid of it. But if the narcissist doesn't have the problems and the person feeling the pain is the observer of the narcissist, and it's like, who cares? The observer just needs to get over it and like mind their own business, like stay in their lane, mind their own lives.
Right.
And that seems to be like a lot of psychological problems are stemming from, or where they came to be, is just the have-nots just upset that they don't have what the haves have.
Well, and I would even say it differently. I would say that if you're with someone who is so self-centered that they treat you poorly, then you get out of that relationship, right? I mean, that seems. I don't want to trivialize people that are in really abusive settings. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying that if you have a friend or, I don't know, a boyfriend or girlfriend who you don't find interesting because they're only ever talking about themselves, just date somebody else. I mean, that seems like a problem to me. That is like,
don't try to fix them. Don't try to label them as having a.
Exactly right. Yeah. And so again, I want to make sure that I understand, there are people who are in, truly abusive environments. I'm not going to touch that. That's very serious. I'm talking about if you're with someone who is, you find that they only talk about themselves, that they don't ask you how you're doing, that they make you unhappy, find a better friend. Don't waste your time trying to get them to read the latest book on how to cure your narcissism or something. Just make a new friend. That seems easy to me. Let me build off of the psychology point. I will tell you, I imagine you feel the same way. And I say this as someone who is a fan of Dr. Drew, but I always dislike the aspect of trying to diagnose from a distance with some of these things. Like, one thing that I don't like is when you'll see people on TV try to like diagnose somebody else from like news clips or, a talk interview, or like like, oh, like that's, that person's giving off these traits. So you see like body language, like, oh, you see how they're holding hands. That means that, secretly he's a, terrorist or something, and just some dumb thing like that. Like to me, I'm always like, this is all bullshit. I mean, obviously it's all for entertainment, right? Like that's why they do it. It's entertainment for the news. But at the same time, you are using words like psychology and expert that people are going to interpret, hey, this person knows what the hell they're talking about. Well, maybe, but probably not. Like if you're making money analyzing celebrity body language on TV, I don't care what you have to say about anything. Or basically. So, that to me, that fits in the same category as like, it's mostly entertainment, but the facade of expertise, I worry people take it too seriously sometimes, and use that to think about other people when they probably should not.
Yeah, being able to hide behind science or an expert, that used to be a thing, I feel like, where you could trust science and trust experts, but not in 2021. I mean, look at the track record of the experts in the science so far.
Well, I think it became too much about selling entertainment on TV than about, actual rigorous discussion about something. It's all about a 30-second clip that can be put into a YouTube clip that can then be filled in with a bunch of ads. Like that's the business model, apparently. And what do people care about? Like stats and data? No, they care about body language nonsense. They care about, psychology profiles of people at a distance. They care about, this inquisitive inquiry into like, oh, I wonder how their sex life is. I wonder about all this other stuff. It's like, this is just like a gossip rag. Like, this isn't information. This is entertainment. And so I kind of like, I want to say that Nassim Taleb's rule on this is like, when you're going to watch the news, don't watch any news that pretends to be serious. Just only watch the pure gossip rag trash, because you're watching it for entertainment anyway. So just dive full into entertainment and don't worry about anything else. I kind of like that idea. It's like, it's for entertainment. I may as well be entertained by it. So.
Yeah. I am concerned though that there's a large group of Americans, or a large group of the world, that just believes anything as long as you say that science says, or experts say, or science says, and then that just gives them freedom to publish whatever propaganda they want to. And people are starting to realize it, and they're starting to cash in on that. So it's hard to say whether this is a form of entertainment at this point, or if it's a form of propaganda, because I think they would look the same from the front.
Yeah, I agree. I don't like, I mean, look, let's just use a funny example. I mean, how many days of the week do you encounter a headline or article that says, a new diet, right? Like, this is the diet. This is the one. Like, cut fat, lose, whatever. This is the one. And like, well, geez, we've been coming up with new diets for a long time. I mean, yeah. Have we figured that one out? Yeah, like, no, apparently not. Like, we're still making new ones. Like, they're all backed by science, backed by whatever. It's like,
yeah, remember the food guide pyramid?
Yeah, exactly right. Like the food guide pyramid. I mean, it's just it's just silly stuff basically, and I think it just gets back into teamsmanship, and you find your team, and you find the science for your team, and it's because it becomes like a bullet in a debate that you try to win an argument, and it becomes more about winning an argument than about trying to uncover something worth uncovering. And
yeah,
I'm not sure I see the benefit. I mean, I'm sure at this point we're boring our listeners by saying that, like, try not to watch the news so much. Like, we've been saying that for like almost every episode. Like, I keep on saying it. Like, I really don't think that people need to watch that much news. And it's let me say this about entertainment. Maybe it's not that it is entertainment because these companies make money off of advertisement and they want you to be engaged in their content. How it's perceived by the audience is, I think, a different question. And to your point, I agree with you. I mean, it would be serious if people really thought that, this new diet is the best of the, and they, turns out that it actually wasn't or something. I agree with that. Could be upsetting. And it just ends up being another form of like teamsmanship or something. It becomes a meme or like a hashtag or something that people like science or whatever. It just becomes a label basically, and loses meaning in the process.
My favorite one is the fact checking industry, like
because both sides have them. How can both sides have fact checking? Like,
you know what I mean? It's like taking it one level further beyond just a news reporting it. It's like, well, this pre-identified fact checker that we have no association with claims this statement to be false or claims this statement to be true. It's like, what credentials do these people have to determine if something is true or not that clearly 95% of humanity doesn't have? Like, what makes them qualified to tell if it's true or not? But it's another form to reaffirm what people want to believe, I suppose. But it's a completely BS industry.
Yeah, well, and again, I think that falls into the entertainment side of it too, because it's like, oh, look, here's a new graphic that shows up on our screen. Fact checker, it's like bullets and everything, or like go back, 10 years. They're like, the no spin zone. Like, really? The no spin zone. All right, hey, everybody, we found it. We found the one unbiased talk show line. We found it. Bill O'Reilly. No spin. This is all just no spin. Like, come on. It's advertising. It's branding. Fact checking is branding. And one more example of how the market ruins everything. No, I'm kidding. But it is an example of how I think advertising corrupts things, and how, I think all of us need to be aware of, at the end of the day, a studio is trying to make ratings. That's what they're trying to do. I mean, even if there are individual people in the institution who don't want that to be their main focus, I'm sure that there are. But how does that organization attract shareholders, attract people to work? By selling advertising, by selling product.
Yeah. And there could be people, it might not just be a fair playing field of what news makes the most money as determined by viewership, but there's like we've talked about before, there are big corporations out there with lots of money that can throw that money and influence things in certain ways that they want to. And with such a big wealth distribution or wealth gap in the world, in the US, it's hard to tell the difference between whether it's an organic push from the news camp companies on certain ideas, or if it's backed by big money, by big business. I mean, if Facebook wants something to be true, I think they have enough money and influence to make that quote unquote true.
Or at least hard to figure out. It's not. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think that
politician in office, all they got to do is run more ads for them, or make it easier for them to run ads. It's scary that that's what it can come down to.
I agree, it's scary, and that goes back to our push about transparency, about at least let us see the strings. If they're there, let us see the strings behind the system. And I agree with you. I agree with a lot of what you're saying, because I think that I think it is becoming, I think just think of like how much advertising we're bombarded with every day, and like how much skill people put into trying to craft those ads to be as effective as possible. We were talking about A/B testing last week. I mean, that's what we're up against. And I don't know if anybody really has a good way to fight back at that point. I mean, it's hard to take on Goliath basically, but I mean, I think that is the fight that all of us are in, is to try really hard. I mean, I think let me just pick a non-controversial example, like native advertising. Like, what does that mean? It means, all right, here's an ad that we're going to disguise as something else. Like, all right, that's kind of weird. Or like now when you and I, or when anybody, when we watch a podcast and someone's like, oh yeah, I've been driving one of these new cars and I like it. It's like, well, are they being paid to say that? Are they saying that because they want to say that? Are they being paid to advertise one thing over the other? I mean, I think I remember back to the Big Short, where the character at the end, oh man, I'm not sure. Christian Bale's character is Michael Berry, or Michael Burry in real life. Was saying how the most important things in life are the things we do besides business. And I think back to that when I think about this idea of these people who have platforms where they express themselves, and how money gets involved with it, and all of a sudden you begin to doubt the authenticity of what they're saying.
Yeah.
To me, it's like, where does the authenticity in a world where there is so much money to be made in social media, in advertising, in podcasts like ours, where does the authenticity begin and where does the marketing begin? And I mean, as we move forward in time, whatever gap exists, I only see it shrinking, where it's like, is the future going to be all of us walking around with like, product that we're trying to sell somebody else? I mean, is that going to be the future, that we just become the billboard? I don't know, but I hope it does not become that, because I like being able to talk to somebody and get their honest opinion without having to wonder, geez, are what they saying coming through 4 filters of like HR legal bullshit that prevents them from like trying to actually feel like, is that the future? I hope it isn't.
Yeah, and it ties back to the merit of living life like Captain Fantastic did, like Viggo did, right?
Yeah.
Like just being out in the middle of nowhere, away from the capitalistic machine of society.
And I mean, as somebody who calls himself a capitalist, I guess I would call myself, or a libertarian, et cetera, like I have always have had, and I've had very sincere friends challenge me on the point of, what is your answer to consumerism? I think that's a great question. I mean, I really do. It's like, geez, like, do I want life to just become one giant market? I don't. I don't. What? What makes life worth living is not a product or a brand or brand loyalty. It's something else. And obviously the virtues of ownership and private property, I think, are important. But it's also important to realize that there's more to life than those things, and more than that, there is a corrupting quality to your relationships when the money comes in between how you talk to other people.
Mm-hmm. I think it comes down to the solution I see is training people to be able to be exposed to these types of things and not be influenced by them. Like, I think that's a little extreme to go and say, oh, I'm going to move my entire clan out in the middle of the Oregon forest. But I think that if you can immunize yourself to the bullshit from the media, and you can do that by reading books like Lose or Think or How to Fail at
Influence.
Yeah. And things we've talked about before is you need to immunize yourself against the bullshit.
Yeah.
And that's a lot easier said than done, because it takes years to study and understand how your own mind works and your own brain works and your own tendencies and what your soft spots are and what's easy for you to believe and hard to believe. But if we had a culture of people that were more independent and more selective in the ideas presented to them, we'd be in a much better space. A space that's much closer, looks a lot closer to logic than whatever we have now.
I agree. And I would just add to that, what I would like is, and I don't know how we get this, but a return to, or not even a return, let's just say a creation of spaces where we just don't have any advertising. Like in our personal lives, it's like, okay, between the hours of like 9 to 5, I'm doing business, but the hours beyond that, I'm not. And I'm not going to be responsible for, business type things. And I'm not going to expose myself to business type things. Like, you almost need to have, like a space where you and your friends go, where it's like, okay, beyond this barrier, we're not talking about anything involving, what we're selling, what we're money, or anything like that. Is completely off limits. And just purposely creating environments where we are not exposing ourselves to commercial influence. Because I think, I just remember, I wish I could remember the movie, but I just remember there was I was watching some movie with like a bodybuilding or something in it, and there was a scene where they were filming people out one of these like bodybuilding expos, and everybody had on a shirt that was like a different protein shake brand or a different, gym product brand. I just remember thinking, like, I can't imagine having to live my life essentially having to like be a billboard for somebody else. It's like, yeah, buy a Muscle Max for the best ones, buy whatever. It's like, is that true? Do you really believe that? Like, you're being paid to say that? Like, it's just, it was just sickening to me to watch this. And like, they had this one shot of like people on the elevator, and like people were like trying to get in front of the camera to like show their brand or something.
Yeah.
It was just upsetting to me. It was like, my God, like, and this is what we've come up with in, 2000 years of civilization. And like, what do we have? It's like people turning their bodies into a billboard. And like, it just seems cheap to me almost. I don't, that's how I would describe it.
Yeah, and especially with all those proteins, like everyone's got their own blend of protein. It's like,
How different can it be?
yeah, how different exactly. Like why pick one protein over the other at this point? Like
No.
Science isn't going to help you choose the right one. All
No,
these guys,
science. You have like 5,500 ingredients in the back of that fucking thing. You're gonna read every ingredient. These things that like words are this fucking long.
yeah, and they all interact with each other, and they're all on steroids, so you can't tell are they really that jacked because of their special sauce and their protein.
Right. Allegedly.
The 3,000 milligrams of testosterone that they're injecting twice a day. It's what really makes the difference there.
Yeah.
But I would like to get to your story. I think you said you had one, right?
Yes. Let me. So let's shift gears. So yeah, we're talking about how we want to limit corporate interests in our lives. And so let me just also mention, of course, we're on Twitter as well at roses_rhetoric. Be sure to follow us there. And of course, our website, www.rosesandrhetoric.com. Also on YouTube, if you search Roses and Rhetoric, our channel will come up as well. We are, recording these live on Zoom, obviously, then we're posting them online to YouTube as well. So yeah, let me shift gears. Let me put the car in park a little bit, if you will, and shift gears a little bit. So I have a story that I wrote kind of following on the theme of stream of consciousness type writing. It jumps around a little bit, but I think all in all, this piece came together, pretty nicely in the end. So I call this piece Pressure. Future generations will be perplexed by our seemingly passive approach to death. And it will be seen that the great evil of religion was the idea of an afterlife, which greatly contributes to this attitude. It is the most unnatural aspect of religious belief. In fact, the attempt of a passive attitude towards death is a uniquely human phenomenon. So many simply accept the great genocide of human mortality. The great irony of the modern age is the traffic jam. Nowhere else is something as miraculous as the experience of consciousness, the last true mystery of the universe, spent in such a tremendously wasteful environment. How have we, as humans, come to allow such a squandering of opportunity? We hear much talk about the conversation about reducing waste. Why do we lack the same enthusiasm for preventing the abundant waste of human experience? And why do some people refuse to signal when they switch lanes? My car is nothing special. A make and model familiar to all, and a color familiar to most. It signals modest means, but ultimately it signals my fear of a car payment. I do regular maintenance, which means that when a light comes on, I bring it in. For the most part, my car runs fine. The brakes screech, but the screech means they're working. That's literally true. But who makes the music and who makes the sound? And in my car, there's usually plenty of sound. I came to music late in life, preferring silence well into my late teens. But something happened in my early 20s that changed me forever. I discovered dubstep. I believe dubstep is the highest calling of music, and I firmly predict it will stand the test of time. Only predict the inevitable. Everything else is just a guess. Electronic music is a music no longer handicapped by the physical limitations of the human body. The only limits are the imagination of the human mind. With the birth of dubstep, for the first time in a long time, we have proof positive of our limitless potential. God save the bass. But there is an unhealthy side of music as well. When it stops being the soundtrack of our lives and instead transforms into a gentle plucking of the harp strings as we slip into a lullaby daydream, we find ourselves no longer awake, but sleeping with our eyes open. That is not to say that all daydreams are bad. Fantasies are fun, and when properly conducted, they can expand the mind. But there is a particular type to be avoided. A healthy daydream is a fantasy that generates self esteem. An unhealthy daydream is one that leads to self hatred. It is always a mistake to excessively daydream about the past. This is different from reflection. Reflection is a process where past events are analyzed so that we can learn from them. It is discovering lessons in the past for future application. This is different from a fantasy. We don't engage in fantasies to learn. We engage in them for entertainment. Fantasies about the past are unhealthy because they are an implicit form of self hatred. You are viewing your past self as unworthy and imagining a better replacement. It is a form of self hatred that masquerades as an activity we find enjoyable. It is masochism. Think about the past only long enough to learn from it, then move on. And if you see me slow down to make room for your car, move over. My car has been through the paces. It has a fair share of scrapes and bruises. A slow crack on my windshield crawls across the glass. And in my cup holder is an old drink from the night before, inviting me to take that uniquely refreshing sip of a watered down soft drink. Every morning is the same. We enter our car and desperately try to recall the cryptic speech patterns of a forgotten time, etched into the back of our mind, the foggy recollection of the dream world we just left behind. We leave that world and enter this one, the great drama, that great drama of forgetting to release the parking brake. My fear is that we live in the moments before a truly cataclysmic human event, the death of hope and the conceit to stagnation. It is a drum I have played before, but if I know one thing, it's rhythm. And if I know two things, it's that the truth deserves repeating. And if I know three things, it's that I hate driving. But it is today, and this is where I am. We are here and now. It is the only place we have ever been, and it is the only place we will ever be. Courage, dying for your sins. Courage, enjoying life as is. Courage, working from where we are. Courage, reclaiming the cosmic perspective. Commute with me, but never be mute with me. Build a community with me. Hand in hand, we will rebuild this world. Humans' greatest achievement, humanity. Someday, but for now, we drive and enjoy the music. Thank you. Thank you.
Very good. I like the atmosphere illusion there to the atmosphere song.
A great band.
Yeah. Okay, before I start jumping into some questions, do you have anything high level, like what might have inspired this, or how this came to fruition?
I love dubstep. I always have, I always will. I began listening to Bass Nectar in probably my second year of college. I quickly fell in love with any and all things heavy bass drops, quick snare drums. Fell in love with it really from the beginning. And I knew when I first heard dubstep, I thought this is the soundtrack to how I think. Like this is how my mind went. This music speaks to me. And so, I might be one of the few people in their late 20s who still regularly has dubstep on their Pandora, on their cell phone, playing in the car.
Okay. And do you want to talk more about the relationship between dubstep and the car?
Yeah, I think, when we're driving, we are fighting the sensation of boredom. That is what we are up against in that space. I have, being in Houston, I've had my fair share of commutes. My wife has as well. The way that I picture commuting is I don't think in terms of distance. I think in terms of time. I need to get to wherever I'm going, and to get there, it's going to take 30 minutes or 45 minutes or whatever the time is. So I don't think about distance. I just think about time. It's like I need to get through this time, and then I will just appear wherever I need to be. Dubstep is the opposite of boredom. It is chaotic. It is loud. It is entertaining. It is engrossing. So when you have dubstep playing in your car, it invites you to imagine this world of infinite possibility and excitement. And so what I want to be very careful of with the viewers is that when we are imagining these exciting worlds, put them in the future. Don't reimagine your past, because then you are hating on yourself. Put your daydreams in the future as something you can aspire to. I think that is really a key difference in how to daydream properly during our commutes, as opposed to how to daydream improperly in our commutes.
Yeah, I agree with how a lot of people think that driving is boring, and that's one of the biggest problems and biggest causes of road rage, etc. What do you think it is about the mind, the human mind, that is so repulsed by boredom or is so offended by boredom and tries to escape it?
I think boredom comes from, I think paradoxically, it comes from a position of self-esteem, that you view yourself as wasting time, but that's only possible if you believe that you can be doing something better. And so in a way, it's our belief in our abilities that causes us to be bored, that we observe what we are doing and we are thinking, I could be doing something better. I think it's a healthy instinct, kind of in the same way as Nassim Taleb talks about, where procrastination is your body revolting against this boredom. We don't put things off that we enjoy, we put things off that we don't like. And so in a way, some procrastination is actually a healthy instinct, in the same way that boredom can be a healthy instinct. It doesn't mean that has to control ourselves. And obviously there are plenty of downsides to procrastinating, but it is an interesting idea to think of, why do I feel this way? I think for people who feel bored, it comes from a belief in their abilities and a feeling that they're not properly applying themselves to life.
Okay, I can see that. Let's see, what else did we have here? Could you give some good dubstep recommendations for some of our
Yes,
listeners that
yes,
might be
yes,
familiar?
yes. So I'm going to pull up my Pandora real quick, and I'm going to show you my last playlist. And
And just to be clear, we're not sponsored by Pandora or
no, we're
anybody.
not. No, we're not yet. If Pandora's listening, give us a call. Uh, so I love Bass Nectar. I do. This is actually one of my favorite songs here. It's called Big Boss by Dr. P. You can see that one on there. That's a good one too.
I'll
Uh,
put that in the notes.
yeah, Bass Nectar, anything done by, you know, uh, Blue Eyes Foundation, I think is the name of the song. They have a good kind of like electronic pop song. They actually did, I think, one of the songs for Twilight, which has a great soundtrack. People like to hate on Twilight because it's fashionable. Twilight actually had one of the best soundtracks that year, and that's true.
I've never
And
heard it.
it's one of the best soundtracks of that year. Worth listening to. A group called Zed's Dead did a remix of the Blue Eyes Foundation that is, I think, a legendary staple in the late 2000s dubstep scene. Definitely worth checking out. I said Bass Nectar is definitely high on that list. I like, who's that girl with the violin that was all that crazy violin stuff? Uh, she knows who we're talking about. She knows who she is. She's great. Lindsey Sterling does a great job too with dubstep. Yeah, I'll make a playlist for our next episode. But I just go on Pandora, type in dubstep. You'll fall in love with it. And stand up for it. Don't let these fucking people tell you, oh, that's not real music. My generation knew music. As Penn Jillette said, people before us gave us the Grateful Dead, which is the worst music that was ever made. So don't listen to them. They don't know anything about music. Like, believe in yourself, believe in your own people, and believe in dubstep.
Okay, very good, very good. Look forward to seeing that playlist come out.
Yeah.
What else do we have here? Unhealthy versus healthy daydreaming.
Yeah.
So you distinguished the difference between healthy versus unhealthy as whether it is more preoccupied with the past than the future. Am I
Yes.
understanding?
Yeah. Primarily on the issue of, does it give you self-esteem or does it take away self-esteem? It's my observation that when we try to reinvent the past, we are harming ourselves by virtue of self-hatred. That we are trying to replace our past with this imagined person, which is, I think, a form of self-hatred. Don't do that. Learn from the past, but then move on. Like, build yourself into the person you want to be. Don't attack who you were. That doesn't seem healthy to me.
And so how is that line drawn between overdwelling on the past versus looking at it in a constructive way to gather what could have been done better and
As
implement?
long as you are seeking out things to learn from, you're in the clear. That's the demarcation. As long as you are looking at the past to learn from it, then you are doing something that I think is productive. When you are imagining a past scenario over and over again, but imagining it differently over and over again as a way to entertain yourself and to fantasize about, what if I had gone off for the football team? What if I had done this or done that? That's not being productive. You have already learned that lesson, whatever that lesson is. You've already learned it. You're learning it over and over again. Just apply it in the future and move on. But it doesn't seem healthy to me to actively over and over again replace the past version of yourself with this, copy and paste superhero that did everything right. That doesn't seem healthy to me at all.
Yeah, that relates to something I've been thinking about recently, which is this idea that there's more or less a natural flow to the world and to the universe, and not to get caught up on any one particular instance. Let me give an example. Like, let's say that you're looking back in your memories and you say like, oh, I shouldn't have said that one stupid thing. I shouldn't have said that one word. I should have described it with a different adjective or something.
I have no idea what that feels like, but let me try to imagine what that. Yeah.
Put yourself in the peasant's shoes and think about that. So, and I find myself not trying to regret those things or not overanalyze those things too much, because it's like, okay, let's say I did use the right word there, but the very next day there would have been another situation where I would have used the wrong word again. Like, just because the mistake happened once, it's probably more likely that mistake would happen many different times. And if it didn't happen in that circumstance and you had avoided that one problem, it would have happened the next day, or it would have happened the next day, or something would have happened. Like, I think a lot about like what Trump says in the media. Like, a lot of people would argue, oh, if he didn't say that one thing about the fine people of Charlottesville or whatever, like, he wouldn't have any problems. He wouldn't be considered racist. But it's like, no, they'd probably just find something else that he said on a different track or something. But it's a difficult concept to describe, but this idea that there's just a natural flow to who people are and to the universe, and that not really just get caught up on any particular wording of a certain thing, but just to understand that, yeah, I was a different person then, that's a different style, there's different improvements that can be made, and just to not get caught up in the specifics of things like that.
I think that's a great point, and I think it ties nicely into this idea with Nassim Taleb and like focusing on system conversations and not trying to predict the future. That, and kind of what you're saying is, if you have a car that runs like shit, it may work one day, but it won't work most days. And so it's like, it doesn't matter like what day it doesn't work on. The problem is the car as a whole. And so rather than fixating on like some particular event, understand what is causing the event to happen and try to make the change at that level, understanding that if it's a person, change will happen over time. And that even if you avoided doing one bad thing one time, if you haven't addressed the habit, you're going to make the same mistake again. And so I agree with what you're saying 100%. And I think it's a great way to frame conversations over, this idea of, Nassim has this idea of like summing over all of history, including things that didn't happen. If your personality is such that, 25% of the time you said something that you don't want to be saying, then even if you avoid it one time, you won't avoid it enough to avoid that 25% being a part of who you are. You have to change that part of your personality to avoid that from happening again. And so I agree. I 100% agree with what you're saying, that if you fixate too much on a particular moment, then you will miss the conversation. The conversation is what habit needs to change, not how to do well one day. Focus on the habit, on the system, and you'll be in much better shape. I agree 100% with what you were saying.
Yeah, it all just goes back to systems versus goals, right? You need to change
systems.
The system, meaningful change, not just a particular instance of a word.
Well, so let me give you this. So let me build on this. What if every time you said the right thing, you thought about it and thought, even though that time I said the right thing, I could have said the wrong thing, and therefore I should learn from that as well. And I think it kind of building back on what you're saying, it's let me not harp too much when I make a mistake, and also let me not take too much credit for when I do the right thing. Let me always have the broader perspective of, I got a little bit lucky there, and and even though I had a good outcome, I still need to work on the underlying habit I'm trying to change, because I want to improve my percentage over time, not just that one particular day where I happen to not be a jerk or something like that.
Yeah, unfortunately, the mistakes stand out a lot more than the good things that happen.
Right.
Like think about if you've like sprained an ankle or hurt your back or anything before, like it's all you can think about. It's like at the forefront of all your thoughts is like, oh, that freaking hurts. But once your ankle heals, like you never think about your ankle again. Or once your back heals, you never think about it. You know, like
Right.
like when you're trying to rehab something or trying to fix a certain pain or shoulder or something, it's like, yeah, it's only when I screw something up, when I do it exercise improperly, that I can dwell and remember it. But if I do all the right PTs and all the right exercises and all the right ways, I don't even think about it. It's not even relevant. So
Yeah.
it's unfortunate you can't emphasize some of those positive actions, and that the only ones that trigger in the mind are the negative ones.
I agree.
But I think we're running a little short on time here. Is there anything else you would like to add in closing to the story?
I want people to take seriously the challenge of listening to dubstep. And I also want people to take seriously the challenge of building on an idea that if you are bored with something in your life, view that as something positive and figure out a way to be less bored, figure out a way to challenge yourself, to apply yourself to things that you find are rewarding, and to be creative, to search out the entirety of life's solution space so that you are not missing on opportunities. Those are definitely the key takeaways, I think, from this episode. I do want to mention, just in closing again, for anybody who's joining us now and didn't, if they missed the beginning or something, next week we are interviewing Phil Lacavara, an author in the Tucson area, on his book False Flags, published by Catalina Press. We are definitely looking forward to that interview. That'll be next Saturday. We'll get that posted. So check out for that. It'll be on our website. It'll be on our YouTube channel. We'll put it on Twitter, everything else. Always remember to like, share, subscribe, follow us, at Roses and Rhetoric. At Roses_Rhetoric, www.roseandrhetoric.com, and also on YouTube as well. Check out for content on there. But those are the main things, Joe. And I'll go ahead and just thank everybody for joining us, and then glad to have my co-host back in the studio, even if it is a virtual studio. And we look forward to seeing everybody next week. So yes, episode number 13 in the books, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jimmy Haggard for signing off, saying ciao.